Abby, and I'm from Midtown, Lexington, and this is me at work.
Hi, I'm Darcy from our downtown church, and this is me at work.
My name is Jamal Garnett from Midtown Two Notch Church, and this is me at work.
Hey there, this is Chris Cook from our downtown church.
So good.
Liz Donahue. I go to Midtown Downtown, and I'm a pediatrician. That is something that's really appealing to me, to get to see a baby when they're born and then take care of them until they're 18, 19 years old. So just getting to have that relationship and watch them grow up and just be a face that hopefully people can at least trust that I care about them. Might not always have all the right answers or, again, be able to fix everything, but that I'm someone that they know cares and will be there. I think the hardest thing is that I like to fix things, and you don't always get to fix things. Just see the results of a lot of sad things like injustice and poverty and relational brokenness and things like that can't just give you a medicine and send you out the door. So because of Jesus, I know that I don't have to fix everything, that he's ultimately the one that will one day bring justice and will heal all of the things that are wrong with the world, and that I just get to be faithful and be a small part of his picture of restoration and what he's doing on earth today.
Well, good morning. How's everybody doing this morning? Good. You look good. You have that going for you. It's good to see you. If you're a guest, my name is Michael Bailey. I'm one of the pastors here at Midtown Fellowship, and I am excited as always to get to be with you guys as we open up God's Word together as a church. We are in the second week of our new series entitled Work, which is, as you guessed it, about work. That's what we're doing. We're diving into this together today. If you are a guest, I want to give you a little bit of an idea of some of what you've stepped into this morning. Here's the thing. As a church, we use a lot of different language to talk about what we are about and what we're aiming for. But on a big picture level, our aim as a church is to follow Jesus together. That is what we are trying to do. And we say this in a variety of different ways. We say we exist to be a Jesus-centered family on mission and a lot of other things. But at the core of it is we are trying to be a people who in every facet of our life follow Jesus alongside one another. That we are a people who have placed the full weight of our faith and our trust in the finished work of Jesus that forgives us of sins and gives us hope in this life and in the one to come, whose lives are now affected all completely and thoroughly in every aspect of who we are. So practically what this means is that we don't think that our faith is one compartment of our many compartmentalized lives, but rather that our faith affects the whole thing. So there's not Christian me and then home me and work me, but there is Christian me, and that affects all the other me's that might be out there. That Christian me and home me are the same me, and Christian me and work me are the same me, because our faith affects every aspect of what we do. And so our aim for this series is to talk very specifically about what does it mean for us to follow Jesus together in light of our work, at our jobs, whatever that may be, whether it's 9 to 5 or what we do at home. What does it look like for us to be a people who follow Jesus together in these spaces? Now, in my experience, what I have found is that in all of the content that is out there about our faith and our work and how those two things relate, most of it, when it comes to following Jesus in our work, most of it tends to relate to things like being a missionary in the workplace, or dealing with frustrations and anger, or how to get along with our coworkers and endure, or things like having good and high character as we work, which all of those things are wonderful things. Those are great things. things. And we're actually going to talk about those things in this series. But where I've found there to be a lack is just in content that talks about our work itself. Content that just kind of talks about why our work, the things we actually do at our jobs, matter to God. So how all of it, the things we do, our to-do lists, our jobs, the actual work itself is important in how God sort of wove the fabric of creation, how he made human life to work, that our work actually matters to him. So, for example, last week, our big idea was that our work is partnering with God to take the world someplace. And when I said that, you all primarily just stared at me blankly. Kind of like you're doing right now, all right? It was like the words that were coming out of my mouth did not really compute with your lived existence. It's almost like you were thinking, you know, Bailey, that may be true for you because your boss is Jesus, but my boss is Frank. And Frank is a tool, right? And so it was just like, I don't understand what you're saying. My work does not feel like it's partnering with God to do anything. My work feels rather miserable. And I want to let you know that we expected that. Like we anticipated that would be the case because it's a total reframing of how many of us think about the jobs that we have to do. And so what we decided to do is that instead of getting down into all the nuts and bolts about, all right, specifically how do we follow Jesus in the workplace, we wanted to take 2 weeks here at the beginning and just talk a little bit bigger picture. To just kind of talk about our work in general and why it matters so much to God. And so we did that last week, and we're going to do that again this week. And how I want to start our time together today is to look at why we feel that disconnect, why we feel the disconnect from God's good intentions for our work and our lived experience, and tackle for just a minute how we tend to want to deal with that problem. So let's jump into Genesis chapter 3. This will be our starting point, and then we're going to get into Colossians a little bit later on. But let's start in Genesis chapter 3. This will be verse 17 through 19. And this is after our first grandparents chose to reject God's authority for their own authority. And God is basically laying out for them now what is going to happen because of their choice. So this is verse 17. This is what it reads. And to Adam, he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Essentially, God says, because of your sin, because you chose to be your own authority and did not want to submit to my authority, that you wanted to be your own gods and you didn't want me to be your God, he says, now the creation that I've put you here to cultivate, the world that I've placed you in to partner with me to take it someplace, the world that I've placed you in to bring life into, it now is cursed because of you. It will produce thorns and thistles for you. And by the sweat of your brow, you will eat bread from it. Essentially, now, in light of all that has gone wrong in the world, creation itself pushes back against our work. And so what this means for us is that our relationship with work, because of this, is kind of a mixed bag, right? It's a mixed bag. While work is meaningful, it doesn't always feel that way. It's not always as fruitful as we'd like for it to be. We don't always accomplish everything that we wanted to accomplish or accomplish it in the ways in which we wanted to accomplish it. And while it can at times be satisfying, it doesn't always feel that way, and often it's very frustrating. It produces thorns and thistles, and thorns are annoying. So sometimes work is monotonous and repetitive and seems not to be going anywhere. And often what we find is that the work that we have in front of us, the jobs that we have to do, they don't always align with our personal interests or our specific wirings or our passions or even the vision for life that we dream for ourselves. We wind up finding ourselves in jobs, working them for years on end, saying to ourselves, this is not what I wanted for me. This is not what I dreamed I would do or I would be. And all of us, on some level, experience some amount of problem with our work, right? Like whether that be overwork or underwork or toggling back and forth in between or overly finding our identity in our work or abdicating our responsibility or just approaching work with wrong attitudes and wrong motives. And the good news of Jesus' death and resurrection is that it offers us the possibility that our work life can actually be redeemed. Like in light of Jesus' new life, there is hope for our work life, that we can have forgiveness of our sinful approaches to our work and have new life as we follow him when it comes to our work. But part of following Jesus is learning how to navigate this reality that while work was made with good intentions, while it's a part of God's good intentions for us, it's also cursed. And it seems to me that the primary way that we try to deal with this problem of the curse in our society is to find the quote unquote right job. How many of you have ever heard this? Choose a job that you love and you'll never work a day in your life. Anybody hear that? Oh yeah, we love that, right? Like we eat that up with a spoon. We say, yes, that's what I'm aiming for. I need to find the right job. I need to find the job that it's just gonna be a joy to go to work each and every day. We think that if we can just find the work that we love, like work that we really, really love, then work won't feel like work anymore. That the burden of it will be gone, that the stress and the frustration of it will be gone, that the monotony of it will be gone. It's kind of like how we naively pursue marriage, right? Like searching for the one, which is a myth, by the way, but we'll get into that later, all right? We won't talk about that right now. But we kind of approach work the same way. We're looking for that one that will fix everything broken in us and usher in for us our happily ever after. Just this time, instead of searching for it in a spouse, we look for it in a career. And the Google search stats actually affirm this trend. Since 2010, internet searches for passion at work have more than doubled, with workers in the United States being the most likely to be interested in the topic. But the problem is that there is no such thing as uncursed work. There's no such thing as work that doesn't actually feel like work. There's no such thing as the perfect job or the job that fixes everything that's broken within us or a job that isn't on some level incredibly frustrating. Now, I'm about to say something that you will not agree with, something that you are probably going to need to wrestle a bit with. It's not going to fit with how you've been taught to see the world, and it's not going to fit with how you've been taught to see and think about yourself. It's this, that the teaching of the Bible is that it is possible for you to put love into your work, even if you don't love the actual work that you do. That your ability to work faithfully and heartily, dare I say, passionately and happily with a smile on your face, actually has very little to do with what you actually do. And I want to show it to you. Let's go to Colossians 3. We'll be in Colossians chapter 3, verse 22 through 24. This will basically be our anchor text for this morning. This is what Paul writes in Colossians. He says, "Bondservants, obey in everything those who are your earthly masters, not by way of eye service as people pleasers, but with sincerity of heart, fearing the Lord. Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ." All right, so Paul here, what he's doing is he's giving us a word to bondservants. And these were people who were normally indebted to someone else and working to pay off that debt. They were servants. And to be clear real quick, Paul is not condoning slavery as we think of it here. The ancient Mediterranean system was vastly different than the American slave trade that we are very familiar with. For one, it wasn't based on ethnicity, and it usually wasn't for life. For two, servants in this context could actually accrue wealth and a standard of living for themselves. But regardless of all of that, it's still not very glamorous work, okay? To be a bondservant wasn't like what everyone in their life was striving to actually become. It was a job filled with mundane tasks, cleaning the floor, washing dishes, weeding around the house, working in the field with very little control over what you do or don't do every day. And Paul says, work heartily. And that Greek word for heartily here is the word suke, or how we transliterate it, psyche. Okay? And because Western civilization places a premium on the mind and our thoughts, we tend to think of it only in terms of our brains, but it actually carried different connotations in the Greek. In the Greek, it actually meant the breath of life within you. Psyche was your total essence, the whole of yourself. It was your life or your soul or your heart. And so what Paul is saying here to bondservants, he's saying, whatever you find to do, do it with everything you've got. Put your whole self into the work that is before you. Pour yourself into the job at hand. Put your whole self, your whole heart. Give it your all. And as modern 21st century Americans, this raises some questions for us, right? Like some resistances. We are prone to say, how on earth can Paul say this about a servant's job? How can he encourage a servant like this? Like, is there any work that could be possibly easier for a worker to hate? Like any other work out there, could it possibly be easier? I would submit that there isn't. Like, is there any work that could feel that could feel more like a curse or more unfulfilling than the work of a servant? I would say no. And our cultural narrative would say, you need to do whatever it takes to get out of that job. You need to do whatever it takes to get out of that space. Your boss, that's a bad job. Your boss treats you like a servant, literally. Literally, he treats you like a servant. You know how unhealthy and unhappy that's going to make you 10, 15 years from now? You need to find new work that suits you. But Paul says, no, you actually don't. You can give yourself wholeheartedly to the work that's right in front of you. You can pour yourself into it. And notice why. Notice what he says here. He says, because ultimately, this is not about the work you do, but who you do that work for. You are not working for your masters. You don't work for your master anymore. You don't work for your master or your boss or your company. You work for Jesus, and that is wholesale different. You don't work, these other people are not your bosses anymore. Jesus is who you work for. Unless you miss what he's saying here, he's telling them that the good news of Jesus' rescue and redemption in their life is that he rescues you from having to have the weight of your hope rest on your career. That the truest true thing about you is not the job you have or the job you don't have or the job you ideally want. The truest true thing about you is that you belong to him. And long after your days of work have come and gone, the truth of the matter is you will still be his. The most important thing about you is not what your work says about you, but what God says about you. And he says you belong to him. And what this does for us is this actually infuses our work with all kinds of meaning and purpose, because it ceases to be about what it does for us or provides for us, and actually becomes about what he does and what he provides through it. In 1 Corinthians 7:17, Paul again is talking to bondservants and free men, and he says this. He says, "Let each person lead the life the Lord has assigned to him, to which God has called him." Let each person lead the life the Lord has assigned to him, to which God has called him. And he'll go on to say that to bondservants, if you can gain your freedom, that's great. You should totally do that. If it's possible for you to do that, do it. But if not, don't worry about it, because you're not a bondservant anymore. You're actually a free man in Christ. And if you're a free man, then you're actually a bondservant in Christ. Either way, your life is no longer ultimately about you. Your life is no longer ultimately about your job. Either way, you are Christ's. But I would encourage us all to notice the implications of this verse. What Paul is implying here is that there is actually a category for God sovereignly assigning a life to you that is his calling for you. A life and a circumstance that he intends to work through, that he intends to do something through. And the default seems to be that it's the condition or the role or the place, whatever it may be, in which you actually find yourself right now. You know, for us, we tend to think about calling only in these like super spiritual terms where God like audibly speaks to us and tells us to go, calls us to go be a missionary in Zimbabwe or something like that. You know, we tend to think about it in those terms. But the scriptures here are saying that in light of the sovereignty of God, the job you find yourself in, regardless of whether or not you love what you do or not, is actually God's calling for you. And it might not be his calling on you forever. That's why he says what he says to the bondservants about like, if you can be free, definitely do that. That's great. That's a better gig. It might not be your calling for forever, but it is for today. It might not be your calling tomorrow, but today it is. And so operate that way. And herein lies the key to enjoying and giving ourselves to our work, even work we initially don't like. It's that we must recover the idea that all of our work is not merely a job, but a calling from God. We must recover the idea that our work is not just our job, but it is our calling from God. The root of our word vocation is the Latin word vocare, and it actually means to call. At the core of the very word we throw around sometimes today to talk about our jobs is this idea of calling. But here's the thing. A job can only become a vocation if someone else calls you to it, and you do it for them rather than yourself. Author and pastor Tim Keller says this really well. We've drawn a lot from him for this series in his book, Every Good Endeavor. I highly commend it to you. You should totally pick it up. I think we might even have a link for it on our website on the series page. Go check it out. But in Every Good Endeavor, he says it this way. He says, we must recover the idea that all human work is not merely a job, but a calling. Our work can be a calling only if it is reimagined as a mission of service to something beyond merely our own interests. In fact, thinking of work mainly as a means of self-fulfillment and self-realization slowly crushes a person and undermines society itself. Something can be a calling only if some other party calls you to it, and you do it for their sake rather than your own. Our daily work can be a calling only if it is reconceived as God's assignment to serve others. And here's the thing, that is exactly how the Bible teaches we ought to view our work. That is exactly what the Bible indicates our work actually is, a calling from God to glorify him for the good of our neighbor. I'll say it a different way. You are not where you are on accident. You hear me? It is not a mistake that you find yourself in the positions and the jobs that you find yourself in currently. It is possible in Christ for you to give yourself fully to your work with a whole heart if you actually believe that God is in control and knows what you need better than you do. Giving yourself fully to your work, whatever that work may be, is ultimately a faith issue, not a job issue. It's ultimately about, do we believe that God actually has got us? Do we actually believe that God has purpose and intention for where we find ourselves in our life? Or do we believe he is out of control and doesn't know what he's doing? We can give ourselves fully to our work when our faith is actually in him. And here's the reality of it. The problem is that way too many of us go to work to serve ourselves than serve him. Far too many of us go to work thinking primarily about what our work does for us than what God might actually want to be doing through it. We go to work not looking to give and to contribute something in our work. We're only looking to get something out of our work. The truth of the matter is that most Americans think of work as a means of personal fulfillment and self-expression. So we are looking for our work to provide for us things like meaning and joy and satisfaction, work that truly embodies who we think we are and that maximizes our fullest potential. We are looking for our work to do something for us instead of for God to do something through it. But the key to giving yourself to your work and enjoying it, like with a smile on your face, is to recover your sense of calling. To remember that God has put you here for a purpose, to recover the understanding that your work is not ultimately about you, but your job is a mission of service that you do for the glory of God and the benefit of your neighbor. Now, you may be thinking, well, this certainly doesn't feel like a calling. It certainly doesn't feel that way to me. It feels like I'm just serving coffee. It feels like I'm just punching a bunch of numbers into a spreadsheet. It feels like a Tuesday. It doesn't feel like God is really doing anything for his purposes in this. And listen, I just want to let you know, I get that. Like, I know that feel. I sense that. The person who actually helped me understand how all human work is actually a calling from God is the old Reformation pastor, Martin Luther. He had a great way of explaining this idea of calling. And what he said was that God intends to fulfill some of his promises through our work. That the way God fulfills his promises to the world is through the work we do. So what he does is he points to the scriptures in Psalm 145:16, and this is what he says. This is what it says. It says that God feeds every living thing. And Luther asks, how? How does God feed every living thing? How does he do that? And he says the answer is simple. God feeds every living thing through the farmers and the bakers and the merchants and the ranchers. That those occupations are the fingers of God by which God is caring for creation through their work. And he goes on to say that all good work is actually God's work. To make his point, he says that God milks the cows through the vocation of the milkmaids. And elsewhere, he says God could give children without using men and women, but he does not want to do this. Instead, he joins man and woman so that it appears to be the work of a man and a woman, but he does it under the cover of such masks. Insert your own creepy sex joke there, right? You ain't got to go to work, whatever. Anyway, sorry. You can email me. It's fine. You can email me. Anyway, his whole point is that under the cover of your occupation, God is actually providing the world with what it needs. That's what's actually happening when you go to work. So that a man who milks cows and delivers milk, giving it to a family who needs it, is quite literally being used as the hands of God to provide what that family needs. In the milking a cow, he is participating in God with what God wants for human beings and what God wants human beings to do on earth. And the thing is that your job, whatever it may be, does this too. A guy named Lester DeCoster in his work, The Meaning of Your Life, A Christian Perspective, really cuts straight to the heart of it. This is what he says. He says, work is the form in which we make ourselves useful to others and in which others make themselves useful to us. He then says to consider this. He says, imagine that everyone quits working right now. Imagine that everyone stops working right now. What happens? Civilized life quickly melts away. Food vanishes from the shelves. Gas dries up at the pumps. Streets are no longer patrolled and fires burn themselves out. Communication and transportation services end. Utilities go dead. Those who survive at all are soon huddled around campfires, sleeping in caves, clothed in raw animal hides. The difference between wilderness and culture is simply work. His point is that the world would fall apart without your work. We would be cast immediately back into the Stone Age, for lack of a better way of talking about it, if it weren't for the jobs that you do Monday through Friday, and sometimes Saturday and Sunday. Luther says to consider the Lord's Prayer. That as we think about this, to consider the Lord's Prayer, in it, Jesus says that we should pray for our daily bread, that God would provide for our daily needs. Think about all the people that means you are praying for and their work, for him to work through as we recite that prayer in the morning or whenever we pray it. Even if we are just asking for bread, think about all the people we are praying for in that small little statement. We're praying for the wheat farmer and the baker, the packaging and delivery company, the grocery store worker who puts it on the shelf. We're praying for the car mechanic who fixed my car recently so that I could get to the grocery store to go buy that food. We're praying for the gas station attendant to make sure they do their job right so that I can get gas to get there. We're praying for the men who work on the road so that I can drive safely to make sure I get to where the food is sold. We're praying for the Department of Transportation workers who arrange all the stoplights and everything so that traffic flows smoothly and it's not just one giant mass of chaos. We're praying for all those people, and we could go on and on and on for a while after this. But the point is that you start to see that God is using all of these people to deliver on his promises. And it all matters. We each need every single one of them. It takes all of these people and many more faithfully doing their work to enable you to have food on your table tonight. That's almost unbelievable, but it's true. It's 100% true. All of these people in their work are God's appointed means of answering prayer. And yours is too. And what he wants us to see is that your work, whether you see it or not, is God answering someone's prayer. It's answering someone else's prayer. So I'll give you an example of a couple of this. So for the past few months, I've been having a little bit of back trouble. I'm getting old. It is what it is. But the past few months, I've been having a little bit of back trouble, and it got to the point where I just couldn't get rid of it. Stretching and everything wasn't working, so I called up my buddy Tim, who's a member here, and he happens to be a physical therapist, and I was just like, hey, man, can you help me? Can you please help me? He was like, dude, come on in. We'll check you out, all that. And this man literally, figuratively, and literally became the fingers of God in my life, all right? Like, with precision, he was able to find exactly where my pain was. Oh, does this hurt? Yes, that hurts like crazy. Okay, I know exactly what's wrong with you. And he was able just to lay out for me. It's like, okay, here's what's going on. Here's where things are weak. Here's where you need to strengthen things. I'm going to give you a plan. Here's how we're going to work to strengthen these muscles so that your pain eventually goes away. And he popped me up and all kinds of other things that were absolutely amazing that I highly recommend for you. But he was the fingers of God in my life. He helped me understand what was going on and devised a plan towards relief. Like, he was essentially God's answer to my prayer. And I feel great this week. It's absolutely wonderful. Another one, a while back, Brandon was hanging out with a buddy of ours who makes tires for a living. And the guy who makes the tires, he said he was really struggling to find any real meaning in his work. And basically, Brandon just ninja moved the guy, right? Which he just kind of got behind all of his defenses. And he said, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to imagine that your family is driving down the road in a poorly made tire, and then it blows out and they crash and die. For what it's worth, y'all let Brandon talk to you like that. I don't know why you do, but you love him for it, okay? I can't figure that out for the life of me. But Brandon said this to our friend. He's like, do you think your work matters now? And our friend was like, well, yeah, absolutely my work matters now. What Brandon was trying to do is he was trying to get my friend to see, hey, your work is important, and your work is actually answering someone's prayers for safety. You are the means by which God is using to provide safe travel for your family and for numerous families across the nation. And the truth is that far too often when we think about our work, we only think about what's right in front of us, and we fail to see the larger picture for how God uses it. And what I want you to see this morning is that as you do your work, God is wearing a mask, working through you to fulfill his promises to the world. How amazing is that? How awesome is that? That when you go to your office each day, when you sit at that same old computer punching in that string of numbers, as you make your child's lunches and cart them off to school, as you unclog plumbing and prescribe medicine and manage technology for your company, God is wearing a mask to love, serve, and care for the world he made. And you are passing on his blessing to the people who know him and to the people who don't. Your work is a calling. In this sense, your work is a ministry. It's a service. Your ministry is your service. It's the part you play as you do your thing to make the garden into the garden city. So as always, what does recovering your sense of calling mean for your Monday? What does this mean for you as you go to work tomorrow? I think there's one primary takeaway, and it's this: to know that God has called you and to actually work like it. To know that God has called you and to actually work like that's true. Or I'll say it this way, to put your heart into your job tomorrow. To put your heart into your job tomorrow. If all of this is true, if you are called by God to work for God, to fulfill God's promises to the world, then our aim tomorrow morning should be to do a good job at the job that we have. As verse 23 says, it says, whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men. The best way to serve and honor Christ at your job is to work hard and to do your job well. So tomorrow, work hard. Don't just come in and do the minimum to get by. Come in and give 100%. Strive to do your job well, to be the best at it that you could possibly be, to be a blessing to your bosses and your coworkers, someone that others are grateful to actually have on the team with them. Not someone who is just looking out for number one, but someone who actually cares about the work that is being done. You know, we often get misled into thinking that the way to honor Christ in our work is to only think about how I can tell my coworkers or my clients about Jesus. And that's great. Listen, that is absolutely a part of it. But truthfully, the number one way you honor Christ with your work is to do your work well. So for example, if you are a pilot, you honor Christ by landing the dadgum plane, right? That is how you honor Christ. Land the plane. From her essay, Why Work, author and poet Dorothy Sayers says it this way. She says, the church's approach to an intelligent carpenter is usually confined to exhorting him to not be drunk and disorderly in his leisure hours and to come to church on Sundays. What the church should be telling him is this, that the very first demand his religion makes upon him is that he should make good tables. The very first thing our faith ought to affect about the way we work is that we do a good job at it. That we work well as God's fingers in creation. You know, I saw a beautiful story of this recently. I had some friends who grew concerned about their child's health. That there were just some things going on that seemed to be a little off. And they had all of these questions about what was happening, and they were really, really scared. And so they went to the doctor to talk to him about all these things. And the doctor came in, and it was beautiful what he did. The doctor came in, and he sat down, and he listened. And he listened for like half an hour, which for those of you who work in the medical field, you know, that can sometimes be a rare thing. A lot of times doctors want to be in and out. But this doctor was like, no, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to listen to all of your concerns. So he listened for like 30 minutes. He wasn't in a rush. He didn't just try to diagnose and split. Instead, he listened to their concerns and he said, I hear you. Here's what I think is going on. He told them what was going on and he took time to answer all of their questions and say, you know what? Here's how I think we need to best move forward with this. And at the end, he looked them in the eye and he said two things. He said, I just want you to know, here's what we're going to do to take care of this. But I want you to know that I know this is scary and really unknown for you. But I just want you to know that I'm here for you. Whenever you need me, I'm here for you. And if you have more questions, then just text me. And he gave them his cell number and he said, would it be okay if I prayed for you? That was amazing. Now, I know not everyone can do that as a doctor, but he could get away with it. It was his practice, and he had kind of an inkling that my friends were Christians. But regardless, that is a distinctly Christian way to be a doctor. It wasn't flashy, but it was love. He did his job well, and he put love into it. He put his heart, the heart of Jesus, into it. I'll tell you the truth. I want that guy to be my doctor, right? Like, don't you? This is a distinctly Christian way to work, and it ought to be the way that we are all actually striving for. And this is actually my prayer for us through this series, that we would become the type of people who approach work this way, who understand that it's a calling from God for the good of our neighbor, who put their hearts into what we do, whatever that may be. Honestly, my desire at the end of this series is that people in our city want those of us from our church to work for them. That's what I want. I want for people who employ others to come to our church saying, hey, I want to get your people to work for me, because they see the perspective that we take on work and they see how we put our heart into what God has us to do. I think that would absolutely be amazing. And so what I want to leave you with this morning is just that your work, whatever it is a calling to serve God by serving your neighbor. And we need you. We need you. We need the work that you have to offer. We're all counting on you out there. So see your work as a calling and put your heart into it. All right, my sermon's over. That's the end of it, okay? Hard transition, pulling out. That's what I have for all of us, okay? That's the end of the sermon. But here's what I know. I know that there are some of you currently in here who you are trying to figure out, what do I need to be doing with my life? Maybe you're in between jobs right now. Maybe you're looking for your first job. Maybe you're contemplating a transition. Maybe you're contemplating kind of moving into a new career field. And the truth is that in our society offers us thousands of different choices about the things that we could do, right? Like if you lived, several thousand years ago, like you'd probably be locked in. Like you would do whatever your parents did, and that was just kind of the end of the story. But for you as a 21st century American, you have some options out there. And so it can kind of be difficult to know, hey, what is the work that I need to be doing? How do I need to be processing this? And so what I wanted to ask you for was just to give me 5, maybe 7 minutes to help you kind of navigate that space a little bit. What I'm about to give you is I just want it to be something of a prayer guide for you as you are prayerfully trying to make these decisions together. I want to just kind of give you some help on how to potentially be praying through your career choices. Make sense? You guys cool with giving me 7 minutes to do that? Cool, great, awesome. I knew you guys were going to be great with that. Fantastic, cool. All right, here's where we would begin. When we're praying through our choices of what should we do, here's where we have to start. We have to start with God, right? We have to start with God and his will. What are the things that he wants us to be about? And I want to begin here by just saying that this is counter to how the world tells you to start, right? Like the world, as we said before, is going to say, start with what you love and what you're passionate about, and let's figure out a way for you to do that, right? Listen, I'm just going to put this out here for you. Following your heart is terrible advice. Can I just say that? It's terrible advice. Jeremiah 17:9 says that the heart is deceitful above all things, and it is beyond cure, which, whoa, it's beyond cure. Who can understand it? And listen, I don't want you to follow your heart. I want you to follow Jesus, okay? I don't want you just to do what you want to do. I want you to submit your life to King Jesus. And that's because here's the deal. That's where the good life is actually found. Following Jesus is where the good life is at, but it might initially lead you to places that you don't really want to go. Plus, your passions change. The things that you love and that you imagine yourself love doing today might be different 10 or 15 years from now. Just ask my wife about this. When she married me, I had never hunted a day in my life. Not one single day. It wasn't even on my radar. Now, I'm a shotgun and a 6-inch lift from being bona fide redneck, okay? Like that's where I am. Hey, and no offense if that's you, you're my people. I'm with you, okay? We're good. But your passions change. Your desires, the things you love, they shift. They're different. And what you love today may not be what you love tomorrow, okay? And so I say all of this to say don't start with your desires, because if you do that, you're immediately going to think that you need to leave the job that you're in. That's what's going to happen. So don't begin there. Instead, start with what God would call good work, all right? And good work is this. Does it help bring all of life under his good reign? Does it help bring human beings to flourish? Like, does it help humanity flourish? Are the poor or the under-resourced being served? Do people get to hear about Jesus through what you might do? Does it take the raw materials of the world and cultivate them and bring the life that God intends for his creation? Does it serve the greater good? Does it contribute to human flourishing? Is it good for you? Is it good for the earth? Is it good for your neighbors or the city? And here's why I say all this, because there are some kinds of work that cannot be a vocation or a calling from God, right? Because not all work is good work. Not all things are what God would say are good for the world. So things like using your body in a sexualized way, right? Or manipulating first-time home buyers into a loan they can't afford. Siphoning resources from a developing country so that the 1% can be a little bit better. Like that doesn't fall under the cultivation and human flourishing thing that God has called us to. And any work that pressures or tempts you to redefine good and evil based on favoring yourself or what's good for the company at the expense of other people or other groups of the planet is not good work. That work means that you are working in the wrong direction and you're not joining God towards the creation of the garden city. So consider that stuff first. What's God's will? What does he actually want for us to be working towards? 2, consider your abilities. Pray about God's will and then pray about and ask God to help you see your abilities. Here's why I say this. I was brought up in a culture that essentially said, Michael, you can do anything you put your mind to. If you work hard enough and you believe strong enough, you believe in yourself and you're patient, you can do anything. And that is such a white middle-class American way to think, right? It's total BS. No, I can't. I can never be an NBA player. I am a 5'8" white boy with no jumper. It's not happening, right? Like, I can't do everything I might want to do. I have to consider my abilities. It's part of how God has wired me. I need to think about these things when I'm thinking about the career options that I'm choosing. So we need to learn what we're good at. That's actually a valuable pursuit. If you try something and you find that you're not good at, that's great. That's actually progress because you're getting a little bit of clarity on what you might be wired to do. There's value in learning this. For example, if you're an introvert and you go into sales, you're probably going to have a hard time having to talk to people 10 hours a day. That's probably going to be really challenging for you. If you're a thinker and you love to read and learn and write, and yet you go into manual labor, it's probably going to drive you insane. It's probably what's going to happen. Now, on some level, we just got to be thankful for whatever job we've got, right? Like, absolutely. I want to put that out there as a caveat. But we need to consider these things as we are processing our career choices. 3, look at your opportunities. Consider God's will, look at your abilities, and look at your opportunities. What do I know? What do I have access to? What sort of jobs can I actually get? What sort of opportunities that has God actually put in front of me? What would actually work for what I need to do as far as earning a living and where we're at in a life stage with my kids and these sorts of things? What are the things that I'm already doing that God seems to be blessing? What does the world need that I can actually step into? What do the people around me need that I could step into? These are how we look and think about opportunities. And then lastly, this. Now, after you've considered those 3 things and you've got some options on the table, now consider what you like. Consider what you're passionate about. Consider what energizes you. Consider what you'd most like to do. Consider the type of thing that you think you would actually love to do. It's not wrong. You've got options. You can consider those things, but the important thing is this can't come first. And the aim is find the middle of where all those 4 circles intersect with each other, and then aim for that, and then hit the ground running. But we've got to hold into tension the words again of Tim Keller in his book, Every Good Endeavor, where he says that just because you cannot realize your highest aspirations in work, it does not mean that you have chosen wrongly, or that you're not called to your profession, or that you should spend your life looking for the perfect career that is devoid of frustration. That would be a fruitless search for anyone. You should expect to be regularly frustrated in your work, even though you may be in exactly the right vocation. So let's consider all those things and then also make sure we're holding the tension of those words. And so in light of those 4 categories, ask, how can I be of greatest service to other people? And as long as your job isn't primarily about your money or your fulfillment or anything like that, you'll always stutter. But when you begin to ask how you can uniquely serve others, you're onto how you're wired to think. If you find something that fits all of those categories right there in the center, give yourself to it and don't look back. So with all that being said, let's figure it out, let's recover our call, and let's get to work. Let me pray for you.